I have some things to give away here. I have a copy of Steal This Computer Book 4.0 from No Starch Press. Anybody interested in this? I'll get the guy in front. I don't want to kill the rest of you.
Oh, it's funner to throw it.
Yeah. Later in the day when my arm's better. All right, T-shirt. And things from Security University. Yeah, I'll have to get more aerodynamic giveaways for the next talks. All right, this one is Printer to Pwned, leveraging multifunction printers during penetration testing. And I'll hand it over to the speakers.
All right, I got a mic. How's everyone doing this morning? Woo! Fairly decent turnout considering all the partying I seen going on last night. So, yeah, this morning's presentation is Printer to Pwned. I hope you don't mind if I walk around a little bit. They gave me a mobile mic, and I kind of like doing that. So let's go ahead and get this going. Introduce myself. My name is Daryl Heiland. I'm a senior security engineer for CDW Corporation, where I do consulting and pen testing for corporations and government agencies. I've been in IT for a little over 18 years. And I'm also a member of the FUFASnet team. Pete?
Good morning. My name is Pete Arzamendi. I'm a consultant at 403 Labs, where we specialize in forensics and the payment card industry. We are a QSA, PA QSA, and ASV scanner. I've been in the computer field for about 10 years. Started as original packet monkey. I'm part of the Fufus.net team, and one of my lifetime goals is to grow a Fu Manchu like Daryl.
There you go. That's a very low goal. Okay, so let's go ahead and start off and get into the agenda. Today's agenda, we're going to go over the history of printing, a very high-level type thing. We'll get into functions and features within multifunction printers. Of course, then we're going to drill down into flaws and vulnerabilities, followed by a few kind of war stories on how we leverage these flaws in multifunction printers during penetration testing. And as we conclude up, we're going to talk about Prata, a Perl-based application that we've put together that can be used to farm some of this information off multifunction printers within a corporate environment. And of course, at the end, we'll take questions. But if we run out of time, me and Pete's going to be here throughout the entire weekend. Stop us, buy us a beer, shoot the bull with us. We'll ask any or answer any questions you have. So moving on to history of multifunction printers, this was kind of interesting. I wanted to throw something up there. But as I started digging into this, the information available is very convoluted. It turns out a few interesting points here. The first laser printer apparently was produced by Xerox in 1969. So it's been out for 40 plus years, quite a long time. The first marketed printer that I could find, and of course HP claimed rights to that, was the 3SI. The first multi-function printer, of course, came out by Xerox in 1987. It was a Xero Printer 100, and it only did printing and copying. So the true first multi-function printers really started hitting the market soon after the 3SI came out. And now it's 2011, and you can scan your ass on about everything available. So besides scanning your ass during the presentation, we're going to dig into all these features, functions, vulnerabilities, and how to leverage that data. So we're going to get into the functions and features within these dice. I'm going to turn this over to Pete and let him go ahead and cover this area.
Thanks, Daryl. As Daryl mentioned, we're going to dig into some of the major functions that we found with these multi-function printers. So what we were doing is we were looking for a way that we can get information from these printers and use this information to attack other systems within the organization. The first section that we looked at were the email capabilities, the ability to take a scanned document or a fax and have it emailed to either a user or a distribution group. And looking at the settings, we commonly see an SMTP server set up somewhere with user credentials in some cases, along with some sort of address book for the employees and maybe even an outside vendor. Another option that we see commonly configured is the ability to fax, either inbound or outbound faxing. Once again, we see an address book populated there, contact information for users within the organization and outside users, along with usernames for the purpose of being able to bill back for the usage of the faxing system. Scanning, as Daryl said, you can do multiple things like scan your ass or other documents. And with the scanning, you have to have somewhere to put those documents. Most printers have two ways to do this. You can either send it to some sort of network file share, which is usually configured with a directory, whatnot, a username and password. And then there's also the ability to FTP to the device and remotely retrieve the documents. LDAP, we see LDAP configured to do user verification, along with, in some cases, populating the address book. And then logging. A lot of devices support the ability to log for usage of the fax or being able to track who's been using the color printer to bill back those apartments for those expensive toner cartridges. And last but not least, a lot of these options are available remotely, so you can retrieve the data remotely and instead of having to be at the device to look at whatever you scan, like in Daryl's case, asses. Now we're going to go into some of the configuration screens of these devices. We're going to focus on 3 different types of devices. The first one is the Shiba. Here's the general starting page after you've applied your username and password. To get in, the one screen we're going to focus on here is the administration screen. This is where you can configure the device and some of the additional features. Here's just the general screen you see when you go to the admin screen, and you can enter in the password for the device to be able to access information. But the most important one we're looking at here is to save the file. Here's the save the file options. Here we're looking at remote to, where we set up the ability to save anything that's been scanned in to some sort of file server, and we have the network path for that location. We have a username and a password. Next family we're going to look at is the Canon. Canon has a lot of cool features. The first one is the mailbox feature. This allows you to take incoming faxes or scans and send them either to a user or a distribution group. It also has several additional functions, as shown here in the little red box. There we go. The option we're going to look at here is configuring LDAP for user verification and or the possibility to publish or possibility to pull address book information. You see, you configure a username and password and the domain from which you want to pull the data from. Canon also allows you to be able to export a lot of these configuration options. It gives you the ability to come up with a master printer and then take those settings and put them on other devices and ship them out to different business units, different places within the organization. Makes it pretty smooth like Jiffy peanut butter. So we see here the address book, pretty self-explanatory. Forwarding settings, any type of documents that you want to have automatically forward to a specific user, whatnot, and then the additional functions. Those are like the LDAP settings that we're talking about. And the last family that we looked at was the HP class of devices. Here we're looking at the color usage log for this device. One important thing to note here is usernames. These devices track the usernames when a job is submitted. This is for the ability to bill back to a certain department ID if the device is heavily used in the color printing and whatnot. Along with the other devices, HP also supports the ability to integrate into your environment using LDAP to populate either address books or to do user validation. And here we set the username once again and password. HP also supports the ability to clone these devices, get them out the door faster. Here we're looking at the send to folder settings, and the ability, once again, to export address books and other settings. There's some also other features in here that allow you to export, once again, the LDAP settings, fax and email settings and whatnot. So now that we've kind of given you a high-level overview of the functionality that's available in these devices, now we're going to show you what we found and how to break these devices. And I'll have Daryl start out with a couple of the ones here.
Thanks, Pete. Okay, in the first category here, we're dealing with security bypass. And we're all familiar with a lot of printers have a default username and factory password set on these devices. So when you gain access to them, they prompt you. But in some cases, those may actually be changed by the business owner or the deployer of the printer to actually add some level of security. In a few cases, we found methods to actually bypass this level of security. The first example we're going to talk about here is the Toshiba eStudio. In this case, we're trying to get to the configuration settings for the scan to file functionality. and we're prompted for a username and password. If it happens to be the default, it's fairly easy. Admin, and the password is 123456. But if that's not the case, it turns out it's easy to bypass. And if you notice something unique about the URL up there, there's an extra slash in there. The funny thing about this extra slash is, I totally found this by accident while I was testing the printer. I cut and pasted this URL in there, left the extra slash in there, and it didn't ask me for the password. It took me straight to the page. Found out this is effective throughout the system. You can gain access to any one of the configuration pages that I've actually tested so far. Just by adding an extra slash in there, we can bypass the security on this particular device. And of course, on the configuration here, we get access to this key information here, the scan the file functionality, which contains the username and password. Here in just a little bit, Pete's going to show you how to actually get that information out of that page. The next one I want to talk about, this one's kind of fascinating. This happens to be a home office device. It's a device that's less than $300. The interesting thing is I'm starting to see these on a large scale within a corporation. A lot of HR department, administrators, managers are putting these small multifunction printer devices that are less than $300 in their office because they really don't like to get up and walk down the hallway to get their print jobs or scan jobs or whatever else they're doing. So they're putting these devices in their office. And they may or may not set security. If they set security, it's fairly easy. In this case here, if you try to get to the fax address book and security set on an office scan device, it's going to prompt you for a username and password. The quickest way around this is basically just add another page equals in there. So if you do page equals, and you can actually put anything you want between the first and second page equals, it really doesn't matter. It's going to give you access to that configuration page, bypassing the security. So the next category of vulnerability is forceful browsing. I think we're probably all familiar with the ability to forceful browse, to gain access to a resource on a web device or a web page just by knowing the URL. Bypass the authentication page and request the data straight up. And I've been looking at a lot of embedded device web interfaces for quite a few years, and the one key thing I consistently come across is that if the file that you're trying to get access to doesn't follow the normal file extension like .cgi, .htm, .html, there's a possibility that you can gain access to it without ever being prompted for a username and password. So here we're going to look at forceful browsing on the Canon image runner to be able to gain access to the export address book. In this case here, the extension is LDIF in the example I'm using here. So the address books on a Canon device, there's 11 of them on there by default. They all or none of them may be considered the situation you're in. But if we increment the AID up all through the 11, we can pull each one of the address books off the device, even if security is set on this device. I've noticed on the Image Runner 3000 that ACLS can be set to 1, and it works. I noticed that didn't work on the 4000, 5000 series. I ended up having to set ACLS equals 2. And of course, there's a few other URL entries that need to be made in there to make this possible. Note, though, this isn't 100%. I think out of about 10 or 15 boxes I've verified this against, about a third of them this failed. So there's a possibility that there is a fix out there. I can't find any documented information on it, but there may be a firmware patch that's been rolled out. I'm not sure. I haven't been able to positively confirm that. But generally, how many people in here are making an effort to go out and do all firmware upgrades on their printers? Okay, we have 3. That makes a certain percentage of people that take security on this probably patching it. But the interesting thing, in the devices that I did notice that this failed on, it was consistent at one company or 2 companies. Either one company, everything failed, or one company, everything was fixed. So it's kind of interesting. We tell who does the security and who doesn't. So you're looking at the address books, and it's real interesting, the information that's available in these address books. This is a real example of an extraction. As you can see, you can pull usernames, which is what you would expect out of an address book. But the Canon also has a capability of containing passwords. The purpose of this is for users to be able to walk up to the printer, scan, and actually save a file to their folder. So it can be configured per individual. How often do I see this configured? It's fairly rare, but I do come across it 3 or 4 times a year in companies, and quickly able to extract username, passwords, and also it shows you the folder and everything that that particular scan for that person could be sent to. So it's fairly straightforward. So now that, let's go ahead to forceful browsing. The other area I wanted to cover is the Xerox. The Xerox has a capability of cloning. That means I can make a copy. If I have 50 Xerox printers that I need to upgrade, I could pull a clone off one and send that clone to each one of those 50 devices and auto-configure that device. It makes it easy for making large deployments throughout a corporation. It turns out, though, if a Xerox printer ends up having a clone operation carried out on it, in a lot of cases that I've checked and tested for, that clone file is left there. In spite of authentication, you can request it at the root of the URL. It may not always be 8080. It varies based on the particular Xerox implementation. But you just request cloning.dlm, and you can gain access to that cloning file. Now, the cloning file turns out to be a compressed format. If you strip this Xerox header off this DLM file, you can just gun-zip it and be able to get to the data. The thing here, though, and this is where we're kind of stuck right now, and we're working on the next phase of it, is the password for this always seemed to be in some form encrypted. I did see a DLM here about 2 weeks ago that I extracted that where it wasn't encrypted, and I'm not sure the case why it was like that. But every other one I've looked at, there's some form of encryption or encoding or something taking place there. We're in the process of trying to figure that out. You know, once that's figured out, then the cards will come crumbling on this house also. So now that I've talked about being able to get access to these pages by bypassing security, extracting data, bypassing the authentication, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Pete, and he's going to cover how, once you get there, how do we get this information?
So, building upon the flaws and vulnerabilities that Daryl found, we started to look at, okay, now that we have access to these configuration screens, what can we get? What can we use to totally demolish this environment? So we started looking at the different configuration options within the device. This right here is a screenshot of the scan to file. And as you notice, can't really see the URL, but this is using the security bypass technique Daryl spoke about. Up there you see the double slash in front of administrator. So we started to look at this type of screen and say, let's see how they're storing these files. We see the ... Pretty secure, hey? Well, big fail boat here. So we start looking at the code. And in the page itself, we see that they're using old style password type values. So you get the ... but yet the value within the code stores the password in clear text. So now we have a valid username and password and a directory or a shared server, whatnot, to start our attacks from. Now we're looking at the Canon device. So in this device, we used default credentials to get past the authentication screen and started looking at the LDAP setup here. Once again, we see the awesome ... Anybody want to take a bet if the password is secure?
This one has to be.
Well, while it's not a total fail, Canon does add a little bit of trickery behind the scenes here. They don't really store the password in the value field. What they do is, because they're so clever, is they stick it in a hidden field at the bottom of the page. So if you scroll through the entire web page, we find, once again, password in a clear text. Now we look at the HP family of printers. And once again, the fail show continues. We see the ... And once again, we look at the source code. We see that the value is set to a clear text password. So in each of these cases, we found that these vendors put all their pride and all their effort into securing just the main page. They figure, well, hey, once you put a password in and username, hey, you're good to go. We trust you. But at no time have we found that they actually verify past that main login page if you really are supposed to be accessing, if there's any credentials, any stored cookies, or anything on a device that actually validates that you're an administrator or should be administrator. So now we're going to go into some war stories, how we were able to use these multifunction devices to compromise entire networks. and famous Office Space picture here. So the first example here, I'm going to grab a different mic. So the first example here was an assessment that was on about 9 months ago. And in this environment, they were doing pretty much everything right. They were securing their workstations, not exposing too much data, only had maybe about 3 or 4 usernames within the organization to start my attacks with. So what I did is started focusing on the printers. Let's see what types of printers that they have in their organization. Well, I ended up stumbling upon this LaserJet, which was located right outside the executive office. On that LaserJet, I started looking at the color log usage. As we've seen before, the color log usage logs each user that has sent a print job to that device. So I found about another 75 to 80 additional usernames. With these usernames in hand, I was able to use the open source tool called Medusa, which is a brute force application that allowed me to submit all these additional user IDs I found with some weak passwords. And the conclusion of that was I was able to find an account that had a really lame password. With that lame password, then, I was able to access other devices within the organization, a couple workstations, and even a server. Based off the access to the server, I found the local admin or domain admin token still residing at the device, and using privilege escalation and incognito, I was able to take that token and, at the end of the day, compromise their entire environment. And this was all based off of information I was able to get out of that color usage log. Without those additional IDs, it would have made it much more difficult to be able to figure out users within the organization and which ones had, bad passwords. Daryl's going to go into another example here of a pen test he was on.
This was a fun one. This took place probably, it was about 4 months ago. It was on engagement, internal to the company. I was looking over their security, and I found that they had a number of the Toshiba eStudio printers. And as we've shown, we can bypass security. If they're using various functionalities, we can extract that data. In this particular case, they had about 6 of these devices. It turns out only one of them was configured to actually leverage the scan the file function. I was able to gain access to the device using the corporate or the default username and password, which is admin123456. I was able to pull the actual credentials off of this box and was able to gain access to the Active Directory with those credentials. The interesting thing about these credentials, it was a restricted user. It did not have elevated rights. But what it did have rights to was one particular folder. The folder it was designed to scan stuff to. This folder happened to be utilized by the payroll department. This printer was used by the payroll department. So the payroll department would come in and they would use the scan the file functionality to save, corporate records that contain PI information and stuff like that. So I was able to gain access to a large amount of those type of scan records. But the most critical thing about it was I was able to use this username and password to gain access to that folder. And what else were they using that folder for? Apparently that folder had been used for a very long time to take regular SQL backups of the entire payroll system for the corporation. So I was able to extract the entire payroll system for the corporation, and it was probably about, I think it was probably about 2,500 employees. And I basically had everything about them since they'd ever been employed by this company and all their personal information. So that was kind of interesting, and the customer was really excited to find that out. The other thing to point out, when you're dealing with printers and the username and passwords that are pulled off these printers when doing the pen testing is this is a generic ID, and it's typically a generic password. So the next attack vector in this was, let's take that same password, now that I've been able to enumerate Active Directory with a valid account and pull all the other usernames out of Active Directory with this, let's go ahead and use that same password and play it back against Active Directory. And that's what I did. In this case here, I did not get domain admin, but I basically gained access to a large number of elevated service accounts that were using the same password, because that's the nature of people, is to utilize passwords against different systems with different levels of security, just because it's difficult to remember all these passwords. It's so hard. So From that perspective, I was able to extract a large amount of data, which eventually led to full Active Directory, access of full Active Directory and domain admin, all initiated from the printer, and of course, the full compromise of their payroll system at a minimum. So the next example, let's go ahead and turn it over to Pete.
Thanks, Daryl. So in this example, this is another pen test, but a little unique situation. This customer has been through several pen tests in prior years. So once again, it's a really well-done network. All the low-hanging fruits are already taken care of, and some of the moderate issues were already addressed. So once again, we focus our efforts looking at printers. Let's see what we can get from these printers. Let's see how far we can get with a printer. And so we started looking around, and we found this Canon image runner. This was in their mailroom. And playing around with it, we found that default credentials, once again, we're able to get into the configuration screen, look to see what functionality it had. It had a couple options to do the file save, some other faxing stuff, but what really intrigued us were the LDAP settings. Using the techniques in the information disclosure, we were able to look at the source code and find the username and password for the account they were using to extract information out of the LDAP server or to authorize the users that are trying to either scan or send a fax or whatnot. Using this information, we were able to extract all the users within their Active Directory domain. So with the list of users in hand, we had plenty of time to goof around, see what else we could do. So what we did is we wanted to see how far this rabbit hole went. So we took this user account and off a little whim and said, let's see if we can access the domain controller with it. So what we did is we were able to remote desktop to the domain controller. Yeah, I know, pretty fun, huh? Once we had access to the domain controller, we found that even though it could remote desktop, it still didn't have enough access to be able to manipulate anything within Active Directory. So at this point, we still weren't able to fully compromise the domain by adding ourselves a domain admin. But using some other techniques and stuff, local privilege escalation, we were able to successfully get the admin access that we wanted and then add ourselves as a domain administrator. So once again, because of the awesome failure of how these developers try to encrypt or hide the password, we're able to easily extract it and then get access to the domain controller, and at the end of the day, once again, compromise the entire domain just off of one printer. And the last example here, I'm going to pass over to Daryl. Go ahead, Daryl.
So probably about 3 years ago, I first came on the team. One of the questions I asked the other team member were, during assessments, have you ever been able to leverage printers? And a couple of guys said, we've poked around with printers, but really hadn't found a whole lot. So actually on the first engagement I was on, I decided to dig a little further into the printer, the embedded devices, stuff like that. And I came across this one, an Office Bridge. This is kind of a high-end fax system. Each user can authenticate himself locally or across the network to this device to carry out faxing operations within the organization. So as I was digging through this, of course, there was a factory default username and password, so it was easy to find that on the internet and gain access to the device. Started looking through the various configurations. I found the LDAP configuration page. I looked at the source, and this one was a little different. The actual password was not in plain text. They had really made it super secret by base64 encoding it. So we quickly extracted that, and the cool thing about this was the ID for this was called sysadm. This is sounding fail from zero, okay? And it turned out this was a domain admin account. So basically within a few hours on the engagement, just playing with the printer, we had full domain admin access into the company here. And this was kind of what kicked off this entire project. Since then, we've been progressively examining more and more printers that we moved along, and then over the last 6 months, 7 months, we've started digging a little harder and saying, can we find more? And as you see in this presentation, we've gone through it, we're starting to find quite a bit of stuff. It becomes very useful during pen testing. This particular diagram here kind of lays out the entire printer attack vector from my vision. It's real simple. We come on, we identify all the network printers on a corporate network, and then we ask ourselves by examining the environment, do they integrate within various systems within the organization? Do they integrate within Windows infrastructure, as a prime example? And if the answer is yes, we start looking at some other things as we talked about in this presentation. Is the system set up with factory default passwords? If the answer is yes, that's bad. Can we bypass security because of some weird flaw within the embedded web server? If the answer is yes, then that's bad too. Obviously, can we do forceful browsing attacks? And if that happens to be the case, we look at the next level. Is there information leakages? So when I get to the config page, were they nice enough to actually put the password in plain text in the source of the web page? And as you see, a large number of organizations that case. And I will point out some of the companies, I've seen some of the HP printers out there don't allow that. And I've also seen almost all the Xerox. I don't think I've actually found the Xerox where information leakage from on the web page was available. So some companies are doing it right. So we don't want to put them all in one box. Also, can the device be used to pull backups and archives, clones and stuff like that? Can we get access to the address book? And if the answer is yes, we're getting to the point of total fail. At that point, we get down to the nice red box, which is never good. At this point, Windows Active Directory and file server systems through SMB, FTP, LDAP, SMTP, we're able to gain critical user credentials that give us access to various Windows services. And of course, some of these integration can be integrated into other systems or services within the corporation. And by just leveraging printers in this attack vector, we're able to gain critical access to corporate systems, lead to full compromise of Active Directory in almost every case that we've actually found usable data on a printer. So that moves us on to automating the process. So we started this probably, that's probably only about 3-4 months ago where we actually started pulling this all together and trying to actually produce something we could actually use on engagements. So we came up with a tool called Prata. Prata is Latin for robber, plunderer. The purpose of the tool is exactly that. You've seen that the data is easily available out there. Let's just go ahead and write a program that can go out for specific printers and pull usable data. That way, when we go into engagement that has, 100 printers, I don't have a day when I'm doing an assessment to go look at every printer. So we want to automate it as much as possible. Pull network printers and potentially appliances. So Prata is in a beta version. It is written in Perl. This is not a complex program. It's very simple in construction. My goal for creating this was to keep it horribly simplistic. I like simple things. I don't like them complicated. And the other thing is when we write a particular module to go against, let's say, an HP printer of a certain version, I might not see that printer again for another 2, 3, 4 months. But I may come across another printer that is very similar, another HP printer, but that module won't work against it. So the question was, do I go ahead and create a module that can handle multiple variations? My fear was, since I didn't have a large test base, that I would just keep stepping on my feet. I would break it so then it wouldn't work for the other printer. Then I'd fix it for this printer and it would break it for that printer. So when you look at the program, you may see a lot of redundancy, a lot of modules that are almost identical. And the purpose of that was to keep from stepping on my own feet as we progress forward. As we get a bigger test base and maybe more people playing with this, we may be able to collapse that in future versions to be able to not be so redundant in that fashion there. So when we look at this, Prata is made up of generally 4 pieces. We have the dispatching program. The purpose of the dispatching program is to take a target list, compare it to the data file. If it matches, run the associated module. So the data files are fairly simple. They're made up of 4 more columns. It's just basically each line item. The first column is actually just a numbering list. The second column and the third column actually do the fingerprinting. It turns out, and this is probably about 80–90% accurate, if you query a multifunction device and pull the title page off the web interface and pull the server, the web server version running, we can isolate that down to a series of modules or a series of products that a particular module will work against. And then we've been very accurate at doing that. Now, obviously, there's some exceptions to this out there, but this has worked pretty good so far. So basically, what we do is this is imported in. The target list will go out there and query each one of the devices. It'll pull the title page, it'll pull the web server type, it'll match it in the table, and then it'll run the associated modules that are listed out here. MP004, 005, those are modules. So then it'll run those modules, it'll extract the web pages, it'll parse those web pages, and it'll pull out those LDAP settings, it'll pull out those usernames, and it'll write it to a log file. It's generally how it works. It's fairly straightforward. At present, we enumerate probably, oh gosh, I think there's about 25 entries in the data list file, and it covers about a dozen different variations of printers. We have some modules that just pull specific items off a printer. Eventually, we may get to writing modules that actually pull all the different pieces at one time, but we've kind of developed the modules to be extremely simple. So if you come into this and you know like this much Perl, you should be able to grab any one of those modules, modify one, and reuse it on a different product, because I wrote it and I know that much Perl. So it should be fairly easy for anybody to actually use this and to rewrite or modify or create modules, which is what we want to encourage everyone to do. Also, we're constantly rethinking the fingerprinting process. Like I said, it's not 100%. As an example, if you go out and fingerprint certain Canon devices, I think it's actually Canon Fireys, they actually come back and there's no title page and the server says Apache. But then you can query certain Xeroxes and you get the same thing. So we are having clobbering that's taking place. So we're reevaluating constantly, is there a better way to fingerprint this without making it too complex? So that's an ongoing process, and it'll probably eventually get changed to something that's a little more thorough. Also, as we showed during this presentation, we're actually extracting backup files, like clone files. I think the Prata actually pulls some clone files down right now off certain Xeroxes. Doesn't do anything with them right now, just pulls them down. And I'd showed you in some of the slides earlier how you could gun zip that data and you can see the passwords encrypted. So we're working on the encryption mechanisms on some of these devices right now, and we'll eventually get that figured out with the ultimate goal of building that into the tool so it'll pull those, gun zip them, decrypt them, and give you the data straight up. That's the ultimate goal. So that's the present research project. We're also looking at migrating this to Ruby. Everyone seems to like Ruby, and you know, I think it may be a better solution. Even when we first started this, that was one of the concepts. Pete, you have something to say about that?
Yeah, so the reason to looking at moving to Ruby is so that we can implement it into, hint, hint, other attack frameworks to leverage some of the other cool things and auxiliary modules that are currently used, just to make it, you know, very easy for, you know, the average pen tester to run this module, gather information and whatnot. Some of the other stuff that we're also looking to do is going after other embedded devices that have web services enabled to see if we can get other information from those devices, kind of like remote access cards that you find in common Dells and HPs, along with UPS power supplies, any type of device that can give us additional information to attack the environment. And so once the Ruby code's done, we're kind of guessing maybe mid-August time frame. We'll have a Ruby version out there and ready for you guys to go and hopefully integrate into some other, you know, really lobster cool attack frameworks.
Yeah, also, even though we're going to be working on a Ruby version, I don't want to discourage you from actually generating useful Perl modules for this, because we can easily convert those over when we get to that point. So we want to expand the tool. And like I said, the tool's beta right now. It does work. It works pretty darn good, I think. Over the last 3 engagements, we've actually been able to successfully use the tool to pull Active Directory credentials off printers on every case automatically and leverage it to gain some level of access effectively. So we're constantly modifying the tool, adding error checking. Sometimes printers return various error pages we've never seen before, so it may just print, you know, it goes to parse the data out. It may just print a bunch of HTML and you go, what the hell's that? If that happens to be the case, just let us know about that and we'll put a check in there to possibly return something else other than that kind of garbage when it's useless. But so it's a beta tool and it's moving forward. I encourage you to use it. Give us feedback on it. I think it'll add a lot of value. And on the other area dealing with other type of modules, embedded systems. There is a couple modules in there right now, but all it does is it checks for default credentials on a couple. I think the one thing is a riverbed, the riverbed compression devices. We came across a company that actually had forgot to change the default passwords. So we thought, well, we'll just throw a module in here. So when we run that at some other engagement, it'll tell us and we won't have to go check. It'll just let us know, then we can go break into them with the default passwords.
Just to add on what Daryl's saying, anybody that submits additional modules, when the Ruby conversion comes around, we'll also integrate those modules and also look for ways to, as Daryl said, right now we have multiple modules that appear to be the same. We're going to try to collapse some of that too within the Ruby code just to make it a little bit cleaner and a lot faster. Along with the Ruby code, it will be multi-threaded, so we hopefully be able to attack more than 100 devices at the same time.
This particular version is not multi-threaded, just to let you know. Also, as we move on, a little bit of whoring for Foofus.net. We're actually hiring, so if anyone's looking for a pen test or a development job with a pen test team, please shoot an email to jobs@foofus.net. We got a couple positions open, so move on to something else. So in conclusion, you can download the tool from www.foofus.net. Please do so. Also, Foofus.net has a mailing list. We also, if you're not familiar, Foofus.net produces the tool Medusa and also FG Dump, and that's available on there. So encourage you to come out there. So we got a few minutes. Any questions?
Just one note here, also with FG Dump, we're working on coming up with another release for that here within the next couple of months.
Have you played with any of the printers that have the security kit to use the PIB cards, like high-end, so you found any like the direct browsing or any of the common issues, any of those?
No, I haven't had a chance to look at those. Now remember, as a pen tester, we come onto a corporate environment and we have a short period of time to do a hell of a lot of stuff. A lot of pen testers in the room understand that. So it's kind of a hit and run type thing. We don't have a day, 2 days to beat the snot out of somebody's printer, or we'd have twice as much or 100 times as much material. Most of the stuff was managed to find in a matter of 5, 10, 15 minutes and then move on. Good question.
Is there anything that we can provide you guys in terms of like sources or anything from more printers that you want to have access to?
Yeah, if you can actually test the printers yourself. Like I said, this is mainly based on getting access to the data. So look at the data on these printers. Look at what's the default passwords for it. Build that into the tool so it automatically tries at least the default password and does some screen scraping of that actual data, especially if there's information leakage problems and the data is actually stored in the source of it. Easy, simple write modules. You can look at the ones we have out there. They're easily repeatable to actually parse that data and send those off to us. We'll continue to keep adding those, and we'll tag them as tested or untested, but at least we'll add them to the modules, start actually getting them into motions.
The current modules are very cookie cutter like, where you can just copy some of the code, adjust some of the values, and then you're off and running.
So one question is, what fixes do you recommend? Well, I got several different fixes. One, don't change the factory default passwords. You know, I'm tired of going in and finding all your Xeroxes set with admin 1111, okay? Or 2222. So remember that. The other thing we want to do is companies do patch their devices. Printer companies do patch their devices. Keep up on these printers you have and roll out the upgraded firmware so that they're continually patched. And in some cases, based on the nature of the printer, you may want to have printers put on isolated VLANs. A payroll department printer does not need to be accessible by everybody in the corporation. A prime example. You have anything to add to that, Pete?
Yeah, another thing is if you have to have it on the same network, you can mitigate some of the risk by using a lower privileged account, ones that can't remote desktop to devices, inactive usage is disabled and whatnot, that it can only write to the directory. It can't, log onto any devices. So using, accounts that have limited access can also help and go a long way.
Any more questions? Someone back here, back there in a brown shirt. Dell printers? I've actually seen the Dell printers out there, and I've crawled a couple of them, but I haven't had a chance to actually examine them in any great detail. So I'm interested in what's available on those. So if you actually have access to Dell printers in your environment and can probe those and give us some useful feedback, I greatly appreciate it. Any other questions? Yeah, right here.
You mostly covered multifunction devices that are Windows-based. Did you see much in Linux-based devices?
Yeah, I see a lot of these devices that are actually leveraging I can't remember what it was. There was one I came across. It was running Sun OS.
Yeah, it was the Fire E.
The Fire Ease is the, I didn't quite understand. I don't know printers that well, to be honest with you, in their functionality, but the Fire E interfaces, from what I understand, is basically a print server to add to the printer. And I found that they're running the Sun OS. I've broken into a couple of those before because of somebody screwing up the username and passwords. And it's a source for actually farming print jobs as they go through. But examining it, I never found any detailed information. When I found the Fire E setting on the device, it's typically setting at port 80. But I found out when you hit that, it's going to return no title page. It's going to return Apache as the server type. At that point, I immediately jump over to port 8080 because there's probably a Canon sitting there, and it probably doesn't have security, and I can gain access to these settings I just talked about. But yeah, we're digging in deeper. Right now, the focus has been really heavy on the embedded web server, the web interface. Now, we know on printers there's a lot of other interface activity on those devices that you can gain access to information, and we haven't got into looking at those yet. But they may be a great source of information that can be leveraged and utilized within the Prata tool also. So yeah, we're probably going to be looking into that stuff and digging deeper and deeper and deeper as we move on through this project. Yeah.
DEFCON, sure.
Have you had much call to dig in deeper, run persistent code or harvest documents, capture what people are actually doing?
Actually, during assessments, I have not actually went after what they're printing. Unless I was external. If the company was like really stupid ass and put the printer on the internet, everything's fair game at that point. I did come off an engagement here about 5 months ago, and it happened to be a mortgage company, and they had set up the printer on the internet, and I was able to actually steal through this method here the username and passwords for the email accounts, but it happened to be their Gmail accounts. So I had access to their Gmail accounts and their passwords for their Gmail account. The other thing is they were primarily using for faxing. So while I was hacking on everything else, I was sitting there and I had a Windows set up that every time a fax job hit the printer, I dragged it to my desktop. So I did that for about a week and stole all their fax jobs going across. But typically if it's an internal assessment, no. But if they put it out on the internet, hell yeah. I'm going to go after everything that goes in and out of that printer because the attackers are going to be doing that, and it doesn't take much effort to do so. But once I gain internal corporate access into the corporate company, I'm going to go after what's of value. In my opinion, the print jobs are value, but the databases where that stuff came from is of more value.
Another thing that we've looked at is being able to remotely initiate the scan bed on some of the office devices. So if, like we found a lot of these devices within the CEO's desk or on the HR desk, is just to trigger the scan bed, see whatever's on there, and try to retrieve that image and save it locally. And
oh yeah, Prata has a tool in it, a module in it. It goes after those little office scans, and it'll automatically trigger the scan bed, even if a password's set, and pull whatever's on that scan bed off for certain office scans. I can take one more question. Anyone? Okay. Oh, right here. Yeah.
Even if an organization changes the default password from the all-numeric string that it is, they'll change it to another all-numeric. In your broader experience, are you seeing that same thing? And do you think it's feasible to know if the password's all-numeric, you just go spin through all the possible?
Well, that's a possibility. As I mentioned, that the keyboards on the printers are so small and complex that they don't get into putting good passwords into the actual printer. So they may just put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or something to that effect in there by default to make it simple for them. We have not tried to brute force the password on a printer at this point because we found out that when we're going to a full assessment, I can guarantee you they've done more than enough stupid ass things already that I don't have to waste a whole lot of time trying to break into a printer. I could use that same effort and probably break into Active Directory because of poor passwords. But yeah, that's a possibility, and I haven't really thought of it from that mindset that since it's so hard to enter a password, are they entering some simple 4-character password? But truthfully, every one of these devices are configurable through the web interface. And if I was ever going to configure one of these devices myself, I would never attempt to do it through the keyboard that's on the actual printer. I would actually go through the web interface, which has a massive amount of capability, and it's just amazing. The other thing I come across is, and I'm always amazed by this, a company comes in and they buy a $12,000 printer. These things are like great. You know, you can do everything but like cook toast or something on them. You can do everything else. And then they use it just for printing. Has anyone can explain this to me? Why do I want to spend $12,000 to print and all the other capabilities are just thrown out the window? I'd really like to actually see these devices leveraged and integrated into the environment so that I can more easily break into everything.
And in those cases too, we see that a lot of the default passwords are set on some of the other functions where you say the file is enabled, and then there's just a default password, but they're not actually using the scanner bed on it. They set it up because it looked cool, and then they forgot to do anything with it. Or they'll just have the default username and password set on the device. SNMP, SMTP, all the defaults are enabled just because they're looking at that one little function that I just want to print with this really nice fancy printer.
Yep. I think that's pretty much it. Thank you for coming. I hope you got something out of this and you enjoyed it.